growth, success of an entrepreneur.
We've raised the bar.
Learn firsthand from successful business owners and create your own path to success.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
It's time to hit the road to growth with team lead of the Enriquez Group, Realtor Vinny.
Hi, Growth listeners. Today I have Sabrina Lloyd. She is the owner of Lloyd Agencies, life, health, insurance, but more than that, I mean, podcasts, writing books, I mean, probably some other adventures that I haven't even got a part of. But thank you, Sabrina, for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to be with you today.
So I mean, like I brought up in the intro, I mean, you do the podcast, you write the books. I mean, you're making all these connections. Is it a pathway back to Lloyd Agencies? Or I mean, how do you describe yourself to other people when you're talking to them?
Yeah, that's my first child, right? When you get into business, I started in business many years ago. So I've been in insurance for 17 years. I actually studied to be a doctor for my whole life. And then I got thrusted into the business world, out of necessity. And I just took off and did very well. And, now where I find myself is a lot of people do reach out. They ask me for, what does it take to be a woman, to be successful in business? And I always fall back and say to them, listen, this isn't a male thing or a female thing. This is are you a good human being thing? And so that's what Stand Alone is all about. And when I developed this concept to bring in guests and, have podcasts and then write a book to reach a global audience, it was really about focusing on leadership, because that's what I found in business. If you couldn't get people to do well in leadership, you'd always be stuck at the most basic level, because through leadership, this is how you scale, reproduce. And it's really what we're talking about is the growth and development of other people. So yes, that is my firstborn child that I love so dearly, Lloyd Agencies. And it's just something that has propelled and introduced me to a lot of awesome people, opportunities. And it's, really my platform and foundation for building a successful career.
Well, I mean, let's rewind a little bit. I mean, you talked about the idea that you had your path was originally going to med school, and then it kind of transitioned to where you are now. I mean, so was that growing up for Sabrina? Was that kind of your goal to be a doctor?
Oh yeah. If you came to me, even the year before I got into business, if you came to me when I was 24 years old and said you weren't going to be a doctor, I would look at you and say, you have no idea who you're talking to, like, get out of my way. Because, that was my whole life's training. When I was, 8 years old, I wasn't watching cartoons or 4 or 5. I was reading like chemistry books. This was something that was like exciting to me. I was memorizing the periodic table of elements. I'm a weirdo like that. So, what happened to me in the business world, and the blessing is that I left the career of being a doctor because I had to make money. And I knew one thing, that if I had to make money, I came to the States after being born and going to school in Canada. And I interviewed for hospital jobs. I interviewed for bank jobs, and they just weren't paying enough. And I'm like, how do people even survive, create a life off of this? So I knew that I had a cousin that did very well in sales, and I knew that people in sales make a lot of money. So I interviewed for a couple sales positions, got a job in an insurance agency, and just took off and did very, very well. And I was able to apply my science background then to learn how to own an agency, then run a business and scale. And so it's been so great.
Well, let's rewind. So you moved to the States. Where did you move from?
I was raised in Toronto, Canada.
Okay. And then your family, you said, they moved to Toronto from somewhere else?
So I was raised in Toronto, and then I went to the University of Toronto. And then at the age of 25, I moved to the States by myself. Okay. And this is when I was looking to go to medical school in the States. And then I did an interview with an insurance company and got hired with them.
And I know you've kind of, again, in this path, I'm just really intrigued by the idea of reading chemistry books at a young age. I mean, where did that passion kind of come from? Where did that want come from? Was it from your parents, from an outside source, internal? I mean, where did that come from?
Yeah, absolutely. I think parents underestimate how much of an impression they have on children, right? It's even as simple as the books that you have lying around, right? It's it's what you like as a parent. It kind of naturally flows into your children. So this is why now, as a mother of three small children, I'm so aware of this to start influencing them in the right direction. But my parents are both from the healthcare field, and my mom has a similar story where she was studying to be a doctor, but then life thrusted her in a different direction. But, my parents they worked in labs for their whole life. So I had chemistry books around. I was raised to be a tough cookie. We weren't allowed to have whatever we wanted. I wasn't raised with like princess beds and pink, you know, walls. We were like washing cars. My dad was like teaching us how to throw a ball. We had to like learn how to serve in our household. And so I share this with people in my book because I think a lot of people today, they're wondering, how do I position my children to be strong? And what I'm coming to understand is that I was raised really well. I just didn't know it at the time. I thought I was living in a hell, right? A small hell with strict parents. When all your friends could do whatever they want and play and sleep over, we were never allowed to sleep over at another person's house. If we were caught hanging around outside and not reading, we were going to get an ass whooping. Like, this wasn't something that was negotiable. So we were raised tough, and it really turns out to serve me very, very well later on. I just know that, looking at my children now, this is something I know a lot of parents grapple with. How do we lead them to be tougher? How do we lead them to be better? And it starts with what we expose them to in our homes. And I'm grateful that my parents had tremendous work ethic. I didn't see them as much as I probably wanted to. A lot of parents today are like kind of always in their children's lives, don't allow them to like grow, develop independently on their own. So I think it's a great time for a lot of people to start thinking about this as parents. Like, if we want to grow strong children today, like, what are we showing them? Not only what are we telling them, but what are we showing them by demonstrating the people that we are and what we tolerate for them and for ourselves.
Was there, them, I know, giving, I guess, the freedom, but also the restraints of kind of what you could do, and them already being in the medical field, you kind of pushing towards the medical field. Then when you basically made that change to get into sales, was there any of a kind of a letdown in their eyes that you weren't going down that path anymore? You're going to go into sales?
Yeah, huge, right? Thank goodness. I had a big falling out with my parents. So we weren't speaking for, it was just shy of 8 years. There was a time where we had a big falling out, and this falling out, this separation, it actually allowed me to focus on my business, because if I had them in my life, number one, I would have been a major disappointment to them, and they would have never tolerated me being in sales and, neglecting the field of medicine. So it worked out to be something that it felt like a curse at the time, but it was actually a blessing. And so that separation from them allowed me to really tune out any noise that would have been in my life, and allowed me to like get really good at studying business, studying sales, and then learning this whole new craft and this whole new world that I was walking into.
Do you, and maybe I'm totally wrong about this. Do you think, because if you were in the medical field or going the medical route before, right, it almost feels like there's a stamp of your parents in that pathway. When you go into the sales route, because you're doing it for, I guess, for money originally, it's more for yourself and kind of surviving. Was that transition of doing it for, I guess, yourself relative to doing it for them, did it change the way you looked at the world, or did that not happen?
Yeah, I think that what happens to a lot of us is we always start off doing something for money.
Yeah.
And that there's nothing wrong with that, but that can't be the reason that keeps you going. Then
Yeah.
that becomes very, very toxic, right? So for me, it was 100% about money. But in my field, and I think this is true for anything, especially in real estate too, when you get people that are dabbling, when you get people that are like half in, half out, and just not committed, you're never going to do well. You're never going to make all the money that industry can then pay you. So what I did in that moment is I actually put my career in medicine on pause, and I told myself, it doesn't matter what happens, I'm going to give this 10 years. One of the things that I've always looked at in my life was 10-year blocks. I never was a short-term thinker where I was hopping around. And so I'm so grateful that I had that ability to do that for myself. So I wrote down, I remember signing up for the company, and they actually made us write down our goals. And I made a 10-year goal that at 10 years, I would reassess and ask myself if I still want to be a doctor. I would go back to medicine. I would go back to medical school. And then I would, go and do what my calling was at that time. I didn't know that I would do as well as I did. And I just took off. And then when I came to that 10-year time period, I really realized that what I loved was teaching and making people better. That's the whole premise of being a doctor, right? Like you're looked at as a source of education for a person's health, how to guide them, how to help their lives become better. And so I looked at my business as that same way of learning and educating myself so then I could lead and guide people to make better decisions and help them along the way also. So I let go being a doctor, but I'm still a crazy science nerd. I love science. I love reading about it. I love applying science laws and practices to my business. I also think too that how our brains process things determines how well or how not well we do. And so when you have a science brain, you process information differently versus if you are just reactive, and when you're not running information through a mind that is taking the time to process it, then you get to be a very reactive person. And that's what allows me to just respond, think deeply about things, and then make a wise judgment. Doesn't mean I'm right all the time, but I go through a series of analysis before I get to decisions. And then the outcome, I look at it, reassess, kind of like a scientific hypothesis approach.
So something you said, right? You talked about 10-year time blocks. I mean, now it's kind of intriguing because I think for a lot of people, right? I mean, a year seems like a long time. Some people go, okay, what's your 5-year plan for you? 10-year time blocks. Now, are those 10-year time blocks based off of age, or are they based off every time you take on a new project? And how often do those 10-year time blocks get reassessed?
Yeah, every time I commit myself to a goal, I look at it in like a decade, right? So for me, when I got into this industry, I knew I had to put in that 10-year time period to then really say, like, am I good at this? Is this something I want to continue to do? When I got to that first 10 years, it's really, really crazy what happens in your mind because it's almost like you hit something. And what I realized in that moment is that you have to make a decision to recommit. You can't just go through it and say like, well, I'll just go through day by day. I'll go through it year by year. And you know what's happening? I think this is really what's happening to a lot of people today. They're so reactive. They're not thinking about things long term. And then they're frustrated. They're quitting. They're starting up again. They're frustrated. They're quitting. They're starting up again. And nothing is happening because growth takes time, and a lot of people don't have the patience anymore because it's so short term. I always tell this to my team. We live in an Amazon world where we want something, we want it now, we want it fast. And if we can't get it, we turn into little brats, right? Stomping. And we have this mindset. We're like, well, I'll just pay more to get it faster. But success isn't like that. Like if you have that mentality, you're almost destined for failure because if you don't grow in a business, it's almost like a tree, right? A tree that grows too fast, the first storm is going to topple that tree. But a tree that's taking the time, planting the roots into the soil, developing through the storms, getting stronger and stronger. This is what this decade, these blocks have allowed me to do. So when I got into my second decade of being in business, I'm coming up towards the last 3 years. And now I'm doing my reassessment, right? What do I want my next 10 years to be? And this is where I start to look at everything. If I continue doing what I'm doing right now, am I okay with this? Or do I want to pursue something different? Has something else intrigued me? And that's what gets exciting, right? You can test out different things. but you're not doing it from a fast reactive kind of ADD type of way. You have to train patience in today's environment, which very, very few people have anymore. And especially with, you know, all this information that we are so blessed with, you have to be very careful how you're digesting it and then applying it individually to your life.
The way you process information and data relative to who you were when you were younger, how has that changed, or has it changed?
Yeah, I think it's built on it, right? And I think that's why one of the things that I did, I hired a coach a couple years ago. And one of the things that he did with me is he went back into my childhood to see how I was raised and how I was trained, because we always revert back to what is familiar. And if you don't fix those beginning stages in your life, then you can't really build that foundation to then propel yourself into the future. And so the greatest thing, it's a blessing that I've had, is that I was committed to finding myself in a career and then studying in that career. I think that's what a lot of young people grapple with today, because we have so many opportunities that are available to us that we're not picking something and then dedicating to that profession and then becoming really, really, really good at it, right? Because there's so much available to us. We think like, okay, well, if this doesn't work, then I'll go and I'll join this industry. And if this doesn't work, I'll go join this industry. And it's not serving us. So I'm grateful that I had picked the profession of being a doctor, and I really was training it for the whole of my life. So I think that allowed me to build up that long-term thinking instead of getting pulled in different directions and, oh, my friend's doing this, let me do this. You know, I never steered or moved in that direction at all.
What was that, what your coach picked up, that you were more, I mean, quicker to transition from one thing to the next at a younger age? Or what did they pick up when they were kind of going over your process?
Yeah, it was really interesting. He picked up that I'm really good at dealing with stress and chaos, you know, because I was raised in a very, very tough environment. And, you know, it's just like when you get into business, even for yourself, it's a lot of stress. It's a lot of new things. And a lot of people run away from that, right? Because if it's not easy, we think like, let's go find something that's easy, or we read a situation wrong, where if it's not easy or feels good, we think like, oh, it's not meant to be. It's not my calling. And I just know that if you can endure tough things, you can get to the other side and you can get to the bliss of a situation. And so I think when you come from a background where you've endured hard times, then it allows you to be really, really good. What's stressful to me, or what's stressful to another person, isn't stressful to me, because I've built up my stress tolerance. And so he saw that in me, and I never even realized that. You know, because when I started in sales, you know, when people panic with rejection, I was like, okay, so what? Who cares? Go to the next one, you know? And I'd see people like, oh my gosh, what did you do? And I'm like, I just kept presenting. Like, I'd see people freaking out over just basic things. And so I never realized that was how I was raised. But this is why I tell people, like, especially when you're young, don't get upset if you're going through a hard time. Don't get frustrated if your parents aren't perfect. Don't come from this place like a victimhood. I talk about this in my book. Like, when you start doing that, you feed the weaker version of yourself. You know, those things are designed to toughen you up. Like, anything you're suffering through, look at it like, bring it on. Like, this is my glory. And it just makes you stronger. So then when you are faced with another situation where it's stressful to someone else and it causes them to collapse and cave in, it won't do that to you. You'll just, it's almost like a lion meeting up with a gnat or a fly in the air. Like, we're not getting up for that. You know, we're not expending our energy for that. We're looking at the fly and we're like, keep on buzzing. You know, you're not worth my energy right now.
I mean, you have a very strong mind. I mean, positive outlook. I mean, it seems, and I mean, everyone deals with some sort of adversity. I mean, looking back at your career, your life, I mean, is there something that pops in your head and you go, that was basically my battle so far, my biggest battle so far?
Yeah, when I was 19, I had that falling out with my parents. And that was probably one of the hardest things I ever went through because I was raised in such a tight knit family. My mom has 10 brothers and sisters. My dad has 8 brothers and sisters. So if you could imagine how many aunts and uncles I had, and it was just such a beautiful way to grow up. And at 19, when I had this falling out with my parents, they all picked my parents and they all just, kind of cut me off. And so I was left by myself. And it was a scary period in my life where I was like, wait, what is going on? I'm not used to fending for myself. I had to learn how to pay for rent. I had to learn how to, go to school full time. So I was working full time, going to school full time. And I was really thrusted into just taking care of myself. And what saved me was that I was just so busy. I had good work ethic. And what that did was it trained, a certain type of work ethics. So when I came into the sales arena, I already had that built up. I wasn't looking for someone to teach me. I don't know if you run into this, but today it's like people don't even know how to work anymore, right? You have to do you have goals? What drives you? And I'm like, my goodness, where is that survival instinct in a person? So I think what that time did for me was my hunger to do well. I love nice things. I don't shy away from that. I've always wanted a nice life. I had an uncle who would always get the nicest cars. He had, the new Mercedes when it would first come out. He was the first person I saw driving a Bentley. This is when I was 18 years old. So this is over 20 years ago. And I'm looking at him like, man, this is amazing. How does he have access to all this? And I remember one time he had the Bentley and I was like, can I drive it? And I'm thinking, this is my uncle. He'll say yes for sure. And he looked at me like I was an alien with 4 heads. And he's like, can you pay for it if you do damage? And I was like, no. He's like, then you can't drive it. And that puts something inside of me. It's like when someone says no to me, it puts a hunger inside of me. So I remember the first year I bought a Bentley and I was driving around, and it's in our subconscious, right? Like what we do later on in our life is because of those moments and what we were rejected with in the past. That's why rejection is not a bad thing. It should irritate your spirit to get it to wake up and then go after it. And so when I was driving around in the Bentley, I remember, this is a car I bought for myself. I remember getting pulled over by the cops one time. And they were like, who are you married to? What area do you live in? Because they thought it was I was married to a rich old man. And I'm like, this is my car. And they're like, oh, okay. So I got rid of that car and I bought I bought a Lamborghini after. I'm like, this is an old man's car. I don't want this car. I want a nice, young, fresh car. But the whole point of this story is listen, whatever you go through, those things that people rejecting you, that time when my parents kind of just thrusted me into the world by myself and I felt so abandoned, it put something inside of me that made me become ferocious, and it made me want to prove myself right, that I could do it on my own. It made me want to, I remember my dad saying to me one time, I'm going to cut your wings. And I said, my goodness. And I instantly said to myself, well, I'm going to grow them back bigger and stronger than ever, and I don't know. I think that's missing for a lot of people. When people say something to me oh, that will never work. I don't know, man. Something inside of me says watch. Now you put me on a mission, on a drive. You gave me that energy to throw back to you. It will work. Watch. I'll make it happen.
Oh, I mean, it's the fight or flight mentality, right? I mean, a lot of people basically fly instead of actually fight. I mean, so with regards to you and seeing how much basically that rejection, that no kind of pushes you to that next level, what was the last rejection that you dealt with that now you're working towards?
Yeah, it's funny. It happens in business too, right? Especially in our business, there's a certain model, the way it's set up. And, when you're an innovator, which is something I always like to do, I like to test out new ways of doing things. I love being creative. And so every time I go and, if I'm saying like, okay, we're going to do this now, people are always just the naysayers around me saying like, oh, that will never work. No one has ever done that. You'll never get away with that. It'll never take off. We made a decision 5 years ago in our business. It's been over 5 years now, to not be lead dependent, which is a huge thing, right? And to just walk away from that kind of broken system and just really focus on referrals and quality customer service and being excellent at your craft so people want to refer you to other people. And when I had this concept, people are like, yeah, that's a great idea. So many people have tried it. It'll never really take off. You'll never be able to produce at the level that you produce. I mean, we've completely proved them wrong. We're now doing it, producing more, and it's been so great because it's freeing. And what happens when people say no to you, it actually creates a freedom for you. Because you've earned and worked through the discipline of what it takes to then proving them wrong. And it's like the greatest sense and source of freedom in your life. I know there's a great saying that I always subscribe to. I think this is Jocko, where he says, discipline equals freedom. And a lot of people think like, if you just do whatever you want, that's what freedom is. That's not what freedom is. Like, freedom is backed up by tremendous discipline. So it's not about being stubborn. You can only innovate, push the limits if you're incredibly disciplined as a human being. And that's another thing that falls back to the way I was raised. My parents raised all of us to be incredibly disciplined little children. We were not allowed to play as much as people were playing. So I think it really comes back and serves you later on in life.
Building your business, and I think for a lot of business owners, is off of referrals is, first off, probably the most cost friendly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you already have that interconnection, that trust, because they've worked with someone that from the way I look at the idea of referrals is some people can be great at what they do, but if they're not training their clients how to refer them, right,
Mm-hmm.
they're not going to get those referrals. I mean, for you, what's been that secret sauce to grow that referral business over the last 5-6 years, whatever you're on right now?
Yeah, it really is experiencing the success of it, right? Because a lot of people toy with the idea, but then also burning the bridge of having another lead source, right? Because if you have something that is easier, you just have to know it's human nature. You're going to go back to what is familiar. You're going to go back to what is easier. And so what you have to do is you have to train yourself to say that's not even an option, right? So when you cut ties with what is old, with what is broken, and you don't have that as an option, then it forces you to forge ahead and then really develop that. So what you have to do and what we had to do is just be so customer service centric, right? You can't be successful working referrals if you are coming from a place of, selling, going to the next person, selling, going to the next person, because no one will want to refer you. And what they're really buying is your experience, right? The experience that you give to them. And so you have to be above standard. You have to be extraordinary. And so that's really what we push in our business, being extremely customer centric and over and beyond in customer service.
You, talked about the idea of 10 years, right? And so 17 years into it. So I'm guessing you have your 3-year goal that's going to be coming up in the near future.
Yes.
What's that goal look like?
It really is expansion. For us, what the virtual world allowed us to do was to tap into markets that we were never able to tap into before. We were very limited. So right now, the blessing of COVID was that we just opened up our ability to scale. So right now, that's what we're doing. We're expanding in different territories that we were not able to be in previously. But we're also very careful with expansion to make sure that we have the right leadership in the right place. So right now, my focus is just leadership development, getting the right people to run the right territories and make sure that that trust is there. And then, moving into beyond 3 years, I think it's about looking at more ownership. I have some great things and great partnerships that I'm looking to align with, to have and create newer businesses too, which I think is so exciting. Not to just get stuck in one business, but in the beginning, I never even thought about doing anything that wasn't this one business. I totally focused, totally concentrated. And now I'm giving myself the permission to operate and to do other businesses that will be just as successful also.
What can you talk about any of those upcoming possible businesses?
Yeah. So I think what works very nicely is staying true to the core, which is insurance. So, expanding in the insurance industry is something that we're always looking to push the limits of. And then also, I really do want to work on a global scale to do more work with women in leadership. This is something that I think there's a call for this right now. But I also want to be that person who will say the right things instead of saying what is, kind of circulating out there. No one's really saying the truth. I think for women today, you've got to be training yourself like no one else. And I say this all the time. It's such a great analogy. I talk about this in my book. When a boy is being raised, he's playing football and he's being tackled to the ground and the parents are screaming at them like, get up, keep going. What is a girl doing? If we're taking ballet lessons, if we're in like pageants, we're not being trained with that same level of aggressiveness. So now when that man meets that woman in a boardroom, who's ready to fight to win? Who's trained to like battle and go at it? So it's about thinking about the girls of the future and working with them to train a certain element of toughness in them so that when they come head to head, they don't back down, right? They know how to hold themselves, still have class. You don't have to be nasty. I'm not saying that, but to be prepared to fight to win. Because I think business is war. I don't dance around with this lightly. I think when people think business is fun and games, you're going to be the first one to be pummeled to the ground. I think if you think it's about rainbows and butterflies and all these ideals that people talk about, oh my gosh, you have no idea what's about to come your way. So I say I'm a business warrior. I'm prepared for war. If you come at me, I'm going to kill you dead. That's what my objective is.
Well, thank you, Sabrina, for being on the Road to Growth podcast. If you're listening and I think if you listen throughout the podcast, it's all about strength, right? Overcoming, pushing through, fighting through. And for you listeners out there, whatever your goal is, you can do whatever you want. That saying is maybe people underestimate what they can do in 1 year, or overestimate what they can do in 1 year, but underestimate what they can do in 5 years. Just imagine if you plan for 10 years, how much you could do, right? So thank you guys for listening. Please go in the show notes, go find Sabrina. Sabrina, for people listening, if they want to hear about upcoming events, upcoming projects, or just look at basically what they have for their health insurance or items like that, what's the best way of them getting the most information?
Yeah. So for life insurance, it's LloydAgencies.com. For me personally, you can go to Instagram. I am Sabrina Lloyd. You can DM me if you want any information. But really it's, I think we live in a social media world. You can just reach out through those means and we'll be able to contact you for whatever you need.
And if you're listening and you appreciate and love Sabrina's tenacity, go to her podcast too. She has a lot of platforms. She has a book out right now. So please go in the show notes, go find Sabrina. Thank you guys for listening. Put your goal together, figure out where you want to go, and stay with it. Thank you guys. Have a great one.